July 17, 1944. 0547 hours. Normandy, France. Oberscharfer Ernst Barkmann peered through the periscope of his Panther Osf. G, watching dawn break over the hedgerow country near St. Lo. His crew had been in position since midnight, hull down behind an earthen embankment, waiting for the American attack everyone knew was coming. Through the morning mist, he spotted them. A column of M4 Sherman tanks advancing in loose formation down the narrow country road. "Tommies," muttered his gunner, using the dismissive term German tankers applied to all Allied armor. "Easy kills." Barkmann smiled beneath his throat microphone. In 2 years on the Eastern Front, he had destroyed dozens of Soviet tanks. These American machines looked even more vulnerable, tall, ungainly, their thin armor practically inviting penetration. German tankers had taken to calling them Ronsons after the American Cigarette Lighter Company's advertising slogan. Lights first time, every time. Hit a Sherman, and it would erupt in flames instantly. What Barkmann and thousands of German tank crews didn't yet understand was that they were witnessing the arrival of a weapon system that would bury the Wehrmacht not through technical superiority, but through a more devastating force, inexhaustible abundance backed by an industrial base that could replace losses faster than Germany could inflict them. The technical specifications told a story of apparent inferiority. The M4 Sherman mounted a 75mm gun that couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at any practical range. Its own frontal armor, 51mm at 56 degrees on the upper hull, 51mm vertical on the lower hull, could be penetrated by almost any German anti-tank weapon. It stood 9 feet tall, making it an easy target. Its gasoline engine was prone to fires. By every metric that German tank crews understood, the Sherman was inferior. Yet within 11 months, the Sherman and its crews would help crush the Wehrmacht so completely that Germany's once mighty Panzer Force would be reduced to smoking scraps scattered across Europe. The mathematics of victory wouldn't be written in armor thickness or gun penetration. They would be calculated in production numbers, replacement rates, and the grinding reality that America could lose 3 Shermans for every German tank and still win, because America built 5 Shermans for every 1 Germany built. This is the story of how industrial logic defeated tactical excellence, how quantity became a quality all its own, and how German tank crews' laughter turned to despair as they discovered that killing Shermans was easy, but America built them faster than Germany could destroy them. The M4 Sherman emerged from a July 1940 panic. As German panzers swept across France, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department faced a terrifying reality. America had no medium tanks suitable for modern warfare. The M2 Medium, with its 37mm gun and riveted armor, was obsolete before it left the drawing board. The Army needed a medium tank immediately, one that could be produced in the thousands and shipped to whatever front the war might demand. The design team at the Aberdeen Proving Ground, led by engineers from multiple manufacturers, created the M4 through pragmatic compromise rather than perfectionism. They mounted a 75mm gun, adequate for defeating any tank in service in 1941, in a fully rotating turret. They used a proven radial aircraft engine, the Reich R975, because it was available in quantity and reliable. They designed the hull for welded construction, which was faster and stronger than riveting. They made the suspension simple and the tracks wide for cross-country mobility. Most critically, they designed it for mass production by manufacturers who had never built tanks. Every component was designed to be manufactured with standard industrial equipment. Complex castings were avoided where possible. Tolerances were loose enough that parts from different factories would be interchangeable. The design could be built in locomotive plants, automobile factories, even converted agricultural equipment facilities. The first M4 rolled off the line at the Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio in February 1942, just 7 months after the design was finalized. This breakneck pace was possible because the designers had prioritized manufacturability over optimization. The Sherman wasn't the best possible tank. It was the best tank that could be built in the quantities needed. Production numbers told the story of American industrial might. By June 1942, 3 months into production, The United States was completing 1,000 Shermans monthly. By July 1943, production peaked at 2,020 tanks in a single month. 11 different manufacturing facilities built Shermans, from Fisher Tank Arsenal in Detroit to Pacific Car and Foundry in Washington State. The total production would reach 49,234 units by war's end, more medium tanks than all other combatant nations combined. The Sherman's design reflected a philosophy radically different from German tank development, where German engineers pursued technical perfection and superior performance. American engineers prioritized reliability, maintainability, and ease of production. The Sherman wasn't designed to be the best tank in a duel. It was designed to be the tank that would still be running after driving 500 miles to reach the battle, could be repaired by crew-level maintenance in the field, and could be replaced within days if destroyed. The powertrain exemplified this philosophy. The Continental R975 radial engine produced 400 horsepower, adequate but not exceptional. However, it was proven, reliable, and available in quantity from aircraft production. The transmission was a straightforward 5-speed synchromesh design that any driver who had operated a truck could master quickly. The suspension used vertical volute spring suspension VVSS, simple coil springs, and bogies that could be maintained with basic tools. Nothing was sophisticated, but everything worked. The crew comfort and ergonomics surpassed anything in German service. The fighting compartment was spacious enough for 5 men to work efficiently. Visibility was excellent, with periscopes providing 360-degree awareness. The turret basket rotated with the turret, keeping the crew oriented. Shell racks were positioned for easy access. Controls were clearly labeled. The gun stabilizer, a gyroscopic system that kept the gun pointed at the target even as the tank moved across rough terrain, allowed fire on the move, a capability no German tank possessed. The early combat reports from North Africa in late 1942 were mixed. In the hands of inexperienced crews facing veteran German tankers, Shermans suffered heavy losses. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943 saw American tanks mauled by German forces that included a small number of Tiger I heavy tanks. The 88mm gun of the Tiger could destroy a Sherman at ranges where the Sherman's 75mm couldn't even penetrate the Tiger's armor. These early defeats created the mythology of Sherman inferiority that would persist throughout the war. German propaganda seized on these encounters, portraying the Sherman as a death trap and American tankers as poorly trained victims. Goebbels' propaganda ministry distributed photos of burning Shermans with captions mocking American industrial production. They build them faster than we can destroy them, but we are willing to try. What the propaganda didn't mention was the asymmetry in replacement rates. When Germany lost a tank, replacing it took months. Replacement crews required extensive training time. By 1944, German tank production was severely limited by shortage of raw materials, Allied bombing of factories, and lack of skilled workers. When America lost a Sherman, a replacement arrived from the depot within days, sometimes hours. New crews were trained continuously at schools across the United States, arriving in theater with standardized training and ready to fight. The real Sherman story began in Sicily in July 1943, where American tactics started evolving to match the weapon system they had been given. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, pioneered aggressive tactics that exploited the Sherman's advantages, mobility, reliability, and numbers. Abrams understood that attempting to fight German tanks in long-range duels was suicide. Instead, his battalion worked closely with infantry and artillery, using combined arms tactics to fix German positions, while Shermans maneuvered for flank shots. The Sherman stabilizer allowed his tanks to fire accurately while moving, a capability German tanks lacked. His crews learned to advance under covering fire, use terrain for protection, and concentrate multiple tanks against single targets. The results were immediate. In the drive to Palermo, Abrams' battalion destroyed 23 German tanks and 40 anti-tank guns, while losing 6 Shermans. The kill ratio was still unfavorable, but it didn't matter. The 6 losses were replaced within 48 hours from depot stocks, while the German losses were irreplaceable. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole, commanding a Sherman in the 3rd Armored Division, exemplified the evolution of American tank tactics. Poole's tank, in the mood, would eventually be credited with destroying 258 enemy vehicles, tanks, half-tracks, trucks, and artillery pieces, over 81 days of continuous combat from June to September 1944. His technique was simple but effective. Advance rapidly using terrain for cover. Fire on the move using the stabilizer. Concentrate fire with other tanks in the platoon. Never give the enemy time to set up a good shot. Poole later described his philosophy. The Sherman isn't a great tank, but it's a good enough tank if you use it right. You don't sit still and trade shots. You move, you shoot, and you have 4 buddies doing the same thing. By the time Jerry figures out which tank to shoot at, we've put 5 rounds into him. The Sherman's fast, reliable, and there's always more of them. That's what wins. The Normandy invasion in June 1944 brought the Sherman against German armor in unprecedented numbers. Operation Overlord landed with more tanks than the entire Wehrmacht possessed on the Western Front. Over 4,000 Shermans in the first wave alone. The logistics were staggering. Each Sherman required 20 gallons of fuel per hour of operation, 100 rounds of 75 mm ammunition, spare parts, and support from dedicated maintenance units. Yet the American logistics system delivered flawlessly. Fuel came ashore in pipelines. Ammunition was pre-packaged in loadouts that crews could install in minutes. Mobile maintenance companies followed close behind the front lines, recovering damaged tanks, replacing engines, repairing tracks. Tanks that would have been write-offs in German service were returned to action within days. The bocage fighting in Normandy revealed both the Sherman's weaknesses and American ability to adapt. The hedgerow country, ancient field boundaries built up with earth and stone, topped with thick vegetation, created a defender's paradise. German tanks and anti-tank guns could hide in hedgerows and ambush advancing Shermans at point-blank range. The tall Sherman silhouette made it easy to spot. Its thin armor made it vulnerable to even small anti-tank weapons. American tankers took heavy losses. In the first week after D-Day, some tank battalions lost 50% of their strength. Reports filtered back describing Shermans burning after single hits, crews abandoning tanks at the first sign of enemy fire, and general demoralization among tank crews facing superior German armor. But the American response demonstrated the system's strength. Rather than accepting losses as inevitable, the Army adapted rapidly. Sergeant Curtis Cullen, a New Jersey tanker, welded steel beams from German beach obstacles onto his Sherman's bow, creating a device that could cut through hedgerows rather than climbing over them. This Cullen cutter, or rhinoceros modification, was immediately standardized. Within 3 weeks, workshops in Normandy had modified 60% of all Shermans in theater. The adaptation went deeper. Tank infantry cooperation became standard doctrine, with infantry clearing hedgerows before tanks advanced. Artillery was called on every suspected German position. Close air support, P-47 Thunderbolts armed with rockets and bombs, was directed by forward air controllers traveling with tank units. The Sherman became the centerpiece of a combined arms system rather than fighting in isolation. Simultaneously, improved versions of the Sherman were arriving in Europe. The M4A3 variant used a Ford GAA V8 engine, producing 500 horsepower, improving power-to-weight ratio and making the tank faster and more responsive. The wet stowage ammunition racks, surrounded by water jackets, dramatically reduced fire risk. The Ronson reputation began to fade as later Shermans proved far less prone to catastrophic fires. Most significantly, the M4A3-76W arrived in July 1944, mounting a 76 mm high-velocity gun capable of penetrating the frontal armor of most German tanks at combat ranges. This version also included improved armor. The frontal plate was thickened and sloped more steeply. While still not equal to German heavy tanks in a duel, the 76 mm Sherman could fight Panthers on more even terms. The German perspective was evolving from contempt to grudging respect mixed with frustration. Unteroffizier Karl-Heinz Mertens, a Panther driver in the 2nd SS Panzer Division, wrote in a letter home in August 1944, "The American tanks are technically inferior to ours. This is true. We can destroy them easily at ranges where they cannot harm us. But there are so many of them. We destroy 5, and 10 more appear. We fall back, repair our tanks, and when we return to the fight, the Americans have replaced all their losses and added more. Yesterday, we knocked out 7 Shermans in one engagement. Our company was jubilant, 7 kills without loss. But this morning we learned that all 7 have already been replaced, while we are still waiting for spare parts to repair 2 of our Panthers that broke down during the battle. They were not even hit, simply mechanical failures. The Americans don't seem to suffer such problems. Their tanks are crude, but they run. I begin to understand that we are not fighting American tanks. We are fighting American factories. And the factories are winning." The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 demonstrated how Sherman tactics and numbers could defeat superior German armor. The 4th Armored Division, equipped entirely with Shermans, engaged the 5th Panzer Army in a 2-week running battle across the Lorraine region. German forces included Panthers, Panzer IVs, and supporting assault guns. On paper, a significant advantage in firepower and armor protection. The Americans deployed 186 Shermans against approximately 262 German tanks and assault guns. The terrain was relatively open, favoring long-range gunnery, where German guns had advantages. German commanders expected a decisive victory. What they got was a catastrophic defeat. American tactics exploited every Sherman advantage while negating German strengths. Superior American mobility. Shermans had better cross-country speed and far better reliability, allowed rapid maneuvers that kept Germans off balance. American logistics meant tanks never ran out of fuel or ammunition, while German units frequently had to halt operations for lack of supplies. American artillery and air support hammered German positions, suppressing anti-tank guns and forcing German tanks to move, exposing them to flanking fire from maneuvering Shermans. The results stunned the Wehrmacht. In 12 days of fighting, the 4th Armored Division destroyed 281 German tanks, 144 half-tracks, 100 other vehicles, and 95 artillery pieces. American losses: 25 Shermans destroyed, 88 damaged. The damaged tanks were nearly all repaired and returned to service within days. German losses were total and irreplaceable. Colonel Abrams, now commanding Combat Command B of the 4th Armored Division, described the battle in his after-action report. The Sherman's technical inferiority compared to German tanks is irrelevant when properly employed. We maintained initiative throughout, forcing the enemy to react to our movements. We concentrated superior numbers at decisive points. We used artillery and air support to suppress enemy fire. We kept moving, never allowing the enemy to establish effective firing positions. The enemy killed individual Shermans, but we destroyed his formations. That is the difference between tactical success and operational victory. The mythology of German tank superiority persisted because it made for good stories. The mighty Tiger destroying 5 Shermans before being overwhelmed by the 6th, the Panthers decimating American tank platoons, the invincible German steel. These stories were true in individual engagements, but they missed the strategic reality. Germany produced 6,000 Panthers during the war. America produced 49,234 Shermans. Germany produced 1,347 Tigers. America built more Shermans in 3 months than Germany built Tigers in 3 years. By late 1944, for every German tank destroyed, America had 5 new Shermans ready for deployment. Germany's replacement rate was effectively 0. Production barely kept pace with losses, and by early 1945, had fallen behind. The crew training differential was equally stark. American tank crews trained for an average of 18 months before seeing combat, with specialized schools teaching driving, gunnery, maintenance, and tactics. Crews trained together as units, building cohesion and understanding. They arrived in Europe proficient in their jobs and ready to fight. German tank crews in 1944 received hasty training, often just weeks, before being thrown into combat. There was no fuel for extensive driving practice, no ammunition for gunnery training, and no time to build unit cohesion. They arrived at the front as individuals, were assigned to unfamiliar crews in unfamiliar tanks, and were expected to fight immediately against experienced opponents. The maintenance and logistics differential was crushing. Each Sherman battalion deployed with organic maintenance capability, tool trucks, spare parts, specialized technicians who could replace engines, transmissions, and major components in the field. The Ordnance Department established a standardized part supply system that ensured any part for any Sherman model could be requisitioned and delivered within days. Tank retrieval was systematic. Each tank battalion had attached recovery vehicles, M32 tank recovery vehicles, essentially Shermans with the turret replaced by a crane and winch. These could recover damaged tanks from the battlefield, often under fire, and return them to maintenance areas. Tanks with reparable damage, track damage, engine failure, minor armor penetration, were fixed and returned to service. Only totally destroyed hulls were written off. German maintenance was ad hoc and desperate. Spare parts were chronically short. Specialized tools were lacking. Recovery vehicles were scarce. German tanks often had to tow each other, and if this wasn't possible, even lightly damaged tanks were abandoned. The Panthers and Tigers, with their complex mechanical systems, broke down frequently. Reports from late 1944 indicate that on average, only 30 to 40% of German tanks were operational at any given time, with the majority deadline for maintenance or lack of parts. The fuel situation was catastrophic. Each Panther consumed 1.3 gallons per mile. In combat conditions, a tank would burn through its entire fuel load in 50 to 60 miles of cross-country movement. Tigers were worse, consuming 1.5 gallons per mile. German fuel production, hammered by Allied bombing and loss of Romanian oil fields, couldn't sustain operations. By late 1944, German tanks frequently had to be abandoned, simply because there was no fuel to move them. Shermans, with more efficient engines and unlimited American fuel production, never faced this constraint. Each Sherman consumed about 0.6 gallons per mile, better than German tanks despite weighing nearly as much. American logistics delivered fuel wherever it was needed in whatever quantities were required. No American tank was ever abandoned for lack of fuel. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated both the Sherman's limitations and the overwhelming power of American industrial logistics. German forces achieved complete surprise, attacking with 410,000 men and approximately 1,400 tanks and assault guns. Virtually every mobile reserve the Wehrmacht possessed. The initial attacks shattered American frontline units, including several tank battalions. Over 200 Shermans were lost in the first 3 days. German tankers initially celebrated, believing they were witnessing the death of American armored forces. Obersturmführer Ernst Bachmann, the same Panther commander who had mocked Shermans in Normandy, now commanded a company in the offensive. On December 18th, his unit overran an American tank park, destroying 17 Shermans with minimal loss. He reported to headquarters. Enemy tank forces disintegrating. Road to Antwerp open. What Bachmann didn't know was that even as he was destroying those 17 tanks, 30 replacement Shermans were being unloaded at Antwerp. The American response to the Bulge showcased logistics as a weapon system. Within 24 hours of the German attack, Eisenhower ordered all available armored units to converge on the Ardennes. The 4th Armored Division, resting after heavy combat around Metz, received orders to move 150 miles north and relieve the encircled 101st Airborne at Bastogne. The division moved immediately. Over 18,000 men, 186 Sherman tanks, and hundreds of support vehicles traveling on icy roads in blizzard conditions. They made the move in 19 hours, arrived combat-ready, and immediately attacked. The maintenance companies moved with them, ensuring any mechanical failures were repaired immediately. The fuel trucks kept pace, delivering thousands of gallons of gasoline. When the 4th Armored broke through to Bastogne on December 26th, their Shermans had driven 150 miles, fought multiple engagements, and still maintained 85% operational readiness. The German forces, by contrast, were already running out of fuel. Many tanks were abandoned when they ran dry, their crews walking back toward German lines. The offensive that was supposed to capture Allied fuel dumps never reached them. American resistance stiffened too quickly. The American counteroffensive began in early January 1945 with overwhelming force. 9 armored divisions, equipped with over 1,600 Shermans, attacked the flanks of the German salient. The German forces, exhausted and out of supplies, collapsed. In 6 weeks of fighting, the Wehrmacht lost over 800 tanks and assault guns. Essentially, the entire force committed to the offensive. These losses could not be replaced. American tank losses in the Bulge exceeded 500 Shermans destroyed or damaged beyond field repair. The replacement system absorbed these losses without strain. By February 1st, all American armored divisions were back to full strength or above. Many units had more tanks than their official tables of organization authorized because the depot system kept pushing replacements forward. The final months of the war in Europe saw the Sherman's role evolve. With German armor increasingly scarce, Sherman spent more time supporting infantry, reducing fortifications, and exploiting breakthroughs. The Sherman's reliability became decisive. Long advances into Germany required tanks that could drive 200-plus miles without breaking down. Panthers and Tigers, when they appeared at all, were often immobilized by mechanical failure or lack of fuel. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole's tank in the Mood epitomized Sherman effectiveness. Over 81 days of continuous combat, Poole and his crew destroyed 258 enemy vehicles, an average of 3.2 kills per day. They achieved this not through superior firepower, but through aggressive tactics, excellent crew coordination, and the Sherman's reliability. The tank never suffered a mechanical breakdown, never ran out of fuel or ammunition, and was always ready to fight. Poole was eventually wounded when his Sherman was destroyed by German anti-tank fire in September 1944, his third tank lost in combat. Within 2 hours, he was assigned a new Sherman and was back in action. The system worked seamlessly. The European war ended with American armored forces deep inside Germany, spearheading advances that captured 300,000 prisoners in the final weeks. The Sherman battalions that led these advances were still combat effective, their tanks running well despite months of continuous operation. German panzer forces had effectively ceased to exist, scattered remnants immobilized by lack of fuel, hiding in forests to avoid air attack, often commanded by officers who ordered their crews to abandon their tanks and surrender. The Pacific Theater told a different Sherman story. Against Japanese armor, primarily light tanks with 37mm or 47mm guns and thin armor, the Sherman was overwhelmingly superior. A single Sherman could destroy an entire Japanese tank company. The real value in the Pacific was the Sherman's ability to provide mobile direct fire support for infantry attacking fortified positions. Japanese defensive positions on islands from Tarawa to Okinawa were typically built into caves, bunkers, and reinforced structures that were impervious to small arms fire and difficult even for artillery to destroy. Shermans would advance with infantry, firing high explosive rounds point blank into firing slits and cave entrances. The 75mm He round could collapse bunkers and destroy machine gun nests that had pinned down entire infantry companies. On Iwo Jima, the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions landed with 68 Shermans, designated M4A3S in Marine service. These tanks provided critical fire support during the 36-day battle for the island. Sherman crews learned to operate in extremely close coordination with infantry, often with Marines pointing out targets from just yards away. The volcanic ash and steep terrain made mobility difficult, but the Sherman's wide tracks and powerful engine allowed it to operate where Japanese tanks bogged down. Marine Corps Sherman crews developed specialized techniques for island warfare. They carried extra machine gun ammunition. The .30 caliber bow and coaxial guns were often more useful than the main gun against infantry targets. They welded additional armor plates on the sides to protect against magnetic mines. They trained to quickly clear the close-range ambushes that were standard Japanese tactics. Technical Sergeant Robert McCard, a Marine Sherman commander on Okinawa, later described the Sherman's role. In the Pacific, we weren't fighting enemy tanks. We were the infantry's mobile pillbox. We'd advance with the riflemen. And whenever they hit a bunker or cave they couldn't handle, they'd call us up. We'd drive right up to the position, put a 75 millimeters round into the opening, and move on. The Sherman was perfect for this. Thick enough armor to survive small arms fire, enough firepower to destroy any fortification, and reliable enough to operate day after day in terrible conditions. The post-war assessments of the Sherman were mixed, often depending on who was asked. Tankers who fought in Europe had complicated feelings. They knew they had been outgunned by German armor. They had friends who died in burning Shermans. And they resented that American industry hadn't produced a tank that was clearly superior to German models. But when pressed, most acknowledged the system worked. Lieutenant Colonel Wilson Hawkins, who commanded a Sherman battalion from Normandy to the Elbe, summarized it in a 1946 interview. The Sherman wasn't the best tank in the war. The Panther was probably better machine for machine. But the Sherman was good enough, and we had so many of them that it didn't matter. I lost 37 tanks destroyed during the war. Every single one was replaced within 72 hours. My men knew that if their tank was knocked out, they'd get a new one immediately. That's a hell of a morale factor. The Germans had better tanks, but they didn't have enough of them, and the ones they had kept breaking down. We had thousands of Shermans, and they ran like sewing machines. In the end, that's what mattered. War isn't about having the best equipment. It's about having enough good equipment and using it effectively. The Sherman was good enough, and we had enough. That's why we won. The German perspective, from the ashes of defeat, acknowledged this reality. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's leading armor theorists and practitioners, was interviewed by American officers in 1945. His assessment was blunt. The Sherman was a mediocre tank that achieved extraordinary results through systematic application and overwhelming numbers. Technically, it was inferior to our Panthers and Tigers. Practically, it was far superior because it existed in quantities we could never match, operated reliably when our tanks were always breaking down, and was supported by logistics we could only dream of. A Panther could destroy 5 Shermans in a single engagement. But America built 10 new Shermans before we could repair the Panther's transmission. That is the true measure of effectiveness. We focused on quality, building the best tanks possible. America focused on quantity, building enough good tanks to overwhelm any opposition. In a long war of attrition, quantity wins. We should have learned this from the Eastern Front, but we did not. The Sherman represented American industrial philosophy. Simple, reliable, mass-produced, and good enough. We Germans were too proud to build such a tank. We insisted on technical perfection. That pride killed us. The Sherman's greatest virtue was not its gun or its armor, but that there were 50,000 of them, and they all ran well. That is a virtue we never achieved. Perhaps the most eloquent assessment came from Obersturmführer Ernst Bachmann, who survived the war as one of Germany's highest-scoring tank aces with 82 tank kills credited, though many historians question the accuracy of German kill claims. In a 1975 interview, he reflected on his experiences. Yes, we called them Ronsons. They lit easily. Yes, we could destroy them at ranges where they couldn't touch us. Yes, our tanks were technically superior. But we lost the war, and the Sherman was a large part of why. I remember in Normandy, we destroyed 7 Shermans in one day. We celebrated that night. The next morning, the Americans attacked with 15 tanks. Where did they come from? We destroyed 5 more. The next day, 20 came. It was like fighting ghosts. You killed them, but they came back. By August 1944, we learned to fear not individual Shermans, but what they represented. Unlimited American production. Every Sherman we destroyed was replaced within days. Every one we damaged was repaired or cannibalized for parts to fix another. They never stopped coming. Meanwhile, our Panthers sat immobilized waiting for spare parts that never arrived. Our Tigers were abandoned for lack of fuel. Our newest tanks were crewed by boys who had barely learned to drive, facing American veterans in their third or fourth tank. The Ronson Lighter joke stopped being funny when we realized we were drowning in a flood of Shermans we could never stop. We could kill them, but we couldn't defeat them because there were always more. After the war, I examined Shermans closely. I understood what we had faced. These were not great tanks. They were good enough tanks built in impossible numbers by a nation with unlimited resources. That was their greatness. Germany built exquisite tanks we couldn't afford to lose. America built adequate tanks they could afford to lose. In war, the side that can afford losses wins. If I could design the perfect tank, it would be a Panther. Powerful, well-armored, deadly. If I could design the tank to win a war, it would be a Sherman. Reliable, plentiful, supported by perfect logistics. Those are different things. We learned this too late. The final Sherman production numbers told the ultimate story. Total production, 49,234 units. Of these, approximately 4,000 were lost in combat, an 8% loss rate over the entire war. The other 92% survived, many being worn out by use rather than destroyed by enemy action. These survivors were distributed to allied nations after the war, serving in dozens of armies for decades. The Sherman served in the Israeli Defense Forces through multiple wars, fighting Syrian T-34s, and proving that a well-maintained Sherman with a good crew could still be deadly 20 years after the war ended. The Sherman served with the Indian Army in the Indo-Pakistani Wars of 1965 and 1971. Shermans fought in the Korean War, in Latin American conflicts, and in various African wars through the 1970s. The basic design was so sound that many nations upgraded their Shermans rather than replacing them. The Israelis developed the Super Sherman, mounting a 105mm gun and diesel engine. The design that had been declared obsolete in 1945 was still winning battles in 1973, a testament to the fundamental soundness of the concept. At the United States Army Armor Museum at Fort Moore, Georgia, M4A3 76, W. Sherman Hull number 544009 sits in a place of honor. This specific tank served with the 4th Armored Division from November 1944 through May 1945, fighting through the Battle of the Bulge and the final push into Germany. It was never destroyed, never suffered a major mechanical failure, and never failed to start when needed. Its odometer showed 3,847 miles when it was retired from service. The placard lists specifications and service record, but the real story is in a display case containing a letter from Colonel Creighton Abrams, who retired as a 4-star general and Army Chief of Staff, written in 1973. The Sherman won World War II not because it was the best tank, but because it was the right tank. It was reliable enough to be driven across France. Simple enough to be maintained in the field, powerful enough to defeat most opposition, and America built enough of them that we could absorb losses and keep fighting. German tankers laughed at the Sherman and called it a death trap. But at war's end, there were thousands of Shermans occupying Germany and no German tanks left running. That's the only judgment that matters. The Sherman was good enough, and we had enough of them. In war, that combination is unbeatable. I love my Shermans. They were honest machines that did their jobs without complaint. They brought my men through battles where superior German tanks were abandoned by their crews for lack of fuel. They kept running when Panthers broke down. They were always there when we needed them. The Sherman wasn't a great tank. It was something better, a dependable tank built in the quantities needed to win. That's the highest compliment you can pay a weapon of war. The M4 Sherman entered service mocked by German tank crews as an easy kill, a Ronson Lighter that would burn at first hit. It ended the war having destroyed the Wehrmacht's panzer forces through the simple application of overwhelming numbers married to reliable performance and perfect logistics. German tankers never stopped being able to destroy individual Shermans. Their technical superiority in firepower and armor remained real. But they learned too late that killing Shermans was pointless when America built them faster than Germany could destroy them, when every loss was immediately replaced, and when the flood of Allied armor never stopped coming. The Sherman proved that in industrial warfare, sufficient quality multiplied by overwhelming quantity defeats technical perfection limited by scarce production. It proved that reliability is more valuable than maximum performance. It proved that logistics wins wars as surely as firepower. By May 1945, German tank crews weren't laughing anymore. They were dead, captured, or walking home through the ruins of their nation. The Shermans they had mocked rolled through Berlin in victory. The Ronson Lighter had burned the Wehrmacht to ashes through the simple expedient of existing in numbers no enemy could match. The Sherman's thunder was quieter than a tiger's, its gun less powerful than a panther's, its armor thinner than a king tiger's. But there were 50,000 of them, and they all ran when they needed to. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was victory.